So hi guys, my name is Nilo and I will be discussing with you guys on conditional statements. This is one of the most important lessons that were tackled in CC Prog 1 and I'm here to give a crash course with you guys. So without further ado, let us proceed with the conditional statements. But before I get to talk to you guys regarding the code or the technicalities on conditional statements, we must first understand the meaning behind conditional statements. So, what are conditional statements? They allow computers to make decisions. So, based on the conditions that were given to them, it will determine which statements will run through the program. So, the condition is evaluated either true or false. So, in the case of the C language, 1 will be denoted as true and 0 will be denoted as false. As you may know, guys, the C language does not have Boolean. So to replace that variable or that kind of variable, they use they use 1 or 0 to denote true or false. And the result of the condition will determine the course of the action in the program. So every program runs in a sequential manner, meaning to say, imagine you have a long list of lines in your code. It will run from the topmost line all the way down to the last line of your program. And if there are any conditional statements in between those lines, then depending on the input or the situation of your program, it will skip or it will run through certain statements. And if you're going to ask me, are there any conditional statements out there aside from programming that are applicable to the real world? And I would say yes. So you guys may encounter rides from amusement parks like in Star City or Enchanted Kingdom, or if you go out of country like Disney World or Disneyland or Universal Studios, then there are certain rides that looks very fun, but you must but there are height restrictions or height minimum requirements before you enter the ride. So if you're tall enough to ride through the good looking roller coaster, then you can enjoy the ride. Otherwise, for safety measures, you're not allowed to ride. Or if you're going to buy certain games of mature audiences, like restrictions to 16 to 18-year-old games, then in the case of Steam, instead of directing you straight to the game page where you can buy the game, it redirects you to a prompt where you have to enter your birth date. And if you're old enough to buy the game, Steam will allow you back to the game page where you can buy the game. Otherwise, it stops you from buying the game. So, what are the conditional statements that we're going to go through in this discussion? So I will be discussing to you guys the if, else if, and else statement and the switch statements. And we're gonna go through each one by one and their examples in a moment. So for the first statement here, if, the syntax of the if is very straightforward. All you have to do is put the if followed by the parentheses, which inside your parentheses is your expression, and followed by the curly brackets wherein everything inside of that if statement has its own statements. And if the if statement ends up to be true, everything inside of the curly brackets will run. Otherwise, it skips through all of the statements that were inside of the curly brackets and go on with the rest of the program. So as you can see here in the diagram, you have your expression here. So the expression will determine through any situation. So for instance, you could say, is your first variable greater than the other variable? And if it's true, run the statement. Otherwise, skip the statement and go on with the rest of the program. So that's basically it for if, and we're going to go through the examples later. So the next one is the if else. So it's similar to the if statement. You have your if statement with your expressions, and inside of that expression you have your statements, except that after the if statement there could be an else statement. So after the if there's an else, and you don't need to put the expression for the else because in the case of where the if statement is false, then it will just run the other code inside of the else statement. It's like saying, if I don't if this ends up to be false, then I will just get the other one. So that's basically the same logic behind the if else statement. So as you can see here in the diagram, you have your expression here, and if the expression here end up to be true, then you can run the statement inside of that expression. Otherwise, then you can run the other statements inside of the else statement, like you could see here in the diagram, statement 2. Afterwards, either way, it will run through the rest of the program. But do note, if the if statement ends up to be true, then you don't have to go through the else statement anymore. And then lastly, we have the if, else if, and the else. So it's a bit complex at first glance, but we can always try to simplify things if we break it down. So as you can see here, it's the same thing. You have your if expression, and then inside of your if statement, you have the rest of your statements, followed by an else if statement. So the else if statement is another expression to be evaluated by the computer if the if statement ends up to be false. So it's like another if, but if the first if ends up to be false, then it will jump to the else if, and so on and so forth. So you can have as much else if as you want, but in this example, I decided to just use the if, else if, and the else just to simplify things. So as you can see here, if the else if has its similar syntax as the if statement. So you have your else if, and then you have your expression, and then you have your curly brackets. Inside of the curly brackets, you have your statement. And like I said a while ago, if the if statement ends up to be false, it will jump straight to the else if, and if it's true, it will run through the statement here, and it will skip through the rest of the else and the else if statements. If you have more else if and then the else, it will skip right. It will skip right every other conditional statements out there, and then run through the rest of the code. Otherwise, if and the else if ends up to be false, then it will go straight to the else statement and run through the rest of the statements inside of the else statement and run through the rest of the program. So you could see in the diagram here, it's exactly what I said. So you have your if expression here, and if it ends up to be true, run the statement inside of it and then go through the rest of the program. If it ends up to be false, um, you have your other expression, the else if expression, and then if it ends up to be true, run through the statements and then go through the rest of the program. Otherwise, if it ends up to be false in both of the expressions, run through the last statement here, which is in your else statement, and go through the rest of the program. So that's basically it for if, else if, and else. And then lastly, we have our switch. The switch statement here is also straightforward. Let's try to deal with it one by one. So you have your switch statement here. You have the switch name of your function, and then inside of the parentheses here, you have your expression. And then inside of the switch statement, you have your different cases depending on the expression being evaluated. And then you can have as much cases as you want. Like that's why I put here case label 1, then followed by three dots, meaning to say you can have as much labels as you want. And then you have your last case label here in the line here. Afterwards, this is optional, but I highly suggest to put a default case here, just in case that if you have an expression that does not match with any of the cases that you have provided in your switch, then it will just go through the default statement. But I would also like you to note that in each of the cases here has its own statements followed by a break. The reason why we have a break is that it will just stick through its own case and then go through the rest of the program itself. Because if there was a case, for instance, I forgot to put a break in the first case itself, then it will run through the next case. And then if the next case doesn't have a break, it will go through the next case, and so on and so forth. That's why we want to put the break, so that we will prevent any unnecessary running of the code. And we're gonna be seeing the examples of what I explained to you guys in a moment. So as you can see here in the diagram, you have your expression, and if that expression is equal to the label that you will provide, then it will run through the statement, and then since you have the break, it will go through the rest of the program. Otherwise, it will check to the other other cases, so if the expression matches with the label 2, then it will go through the second statement and then go through the rest of the program, and so on and so forth. And if everything ends up to be false, it will run through the default statement here, as you can see in the diagram here. Statement, it's the same thing here as default statement, and then run through the rest of the program. So that's basically it for the concept wise and the syntax regarding the if, else if, and else, and the in the switch statements. So let's try to go through the different examples through the code that I have provided. So as you can see here, this program runs and it will ask the user to input two numbers. One number will be placed into the x variable, which is an integer, and the second number will fall under the y variable, which is also an integer. And as you can see here, there is a conditional statement here, the if statement, and the expression inside of it wants to know, is x less than y? And if x is less than y, then it will print out the statement that x is smaller, and then the program will terminate. So let's try to run this program to see how it will look like, or how the program will run. So I compile the program, and then let's say the value that I'm going to put for x is 1, and somehow the program right now is a bit slow, so please bear with me. So 1, and then the second number for the y, let's try to put 2. So as you can see here, since we put 1 for x and 2 for y, it goes now to the conditional statement here and checks, is 1 less than 2? And since 1 is less than 2, it gives out the true condition. Everything inside of the statement will run. So in this program, I only put one print statement here that says that x is smaller, and then go through the rest of the program. So similarly to the program that we just run, it prints out x is smaller, and then the program terminated. So let's see what happens if x is greater than y. So let's say x is 2. Let's try to wait for the program as it tries to render out the number 2. I'm not sure why it's slow, but please bear with me once again. So here we go. X is 2 and y is 1. So as you can see, it just says program terminated, because once we have the inputs coming from the user, so we say that x is 2 and y is 1, and it goes through the conditional statement, and it will ask, is 2 less than 1? Since the answer is obviously wrong, false, or in other words, everything inside of the it statement is skipped, and then it runs through the rest of the program. So that's basically it for the if statement.